thank you very much for having Visualizing Palestine on this platform. I'm here representing an entire team back in Beirut and other different countries, so thanks to Art Electronica. Before I start with the presentation, I'd like to get a sense of the audience. Who in this audience has ever had any experience directly about the Palestinian territories beyond mainstream media? Can you raise hands? So okay, just one person. Okay, so Visualizing Palestine deals with, just like many of us, I guess, in this room, with humongous amounts of data that is quite available on the internet and accessible to the public, but sometimes rarely used. There's data reports produced on a yearly basis by international organizations as well as Palestinian and Israeli organizations, international ones such as the UN, Amnesty, World Bank, and Israeli such as B'Tselem and Palestinian Al-Haq and other ones. And it's massive, all of that information, and it's great to have. But at the end of the day, you ask yourself, okay, all of that is available, so what? There's so much content. What do we do with it? We are currently collecting information about how much data there is, particularly on Palestine and Israel. And actually, in the years 2008 to 2012, it was the second most reported by the Human Rights Watch after the US and with China and Tibet. And if you look at the population of Israel and Palestine collectively is actually 0.2% of the world population, producing 4% of the number of reports by Human Rights Watch, whereas China and Tibet form 19% of the world population and producing the same amount of reports from Human Rights Watch. So this gives you a scale of how much information is out there and data is out there, particularly just from this one organization, so you can imagine the rest. What we do is take this data and turn it into visuals through a process that I'll be speaking about. But this is an example of very basic data collected from year 2000. The lines going upward are Palestinians killed throughout the years up to 2013, including the last Gaza attack in 2012. The lines darker and going down are Israelis killed, and the relationship with elections, Israeli elections. Now, if we look at particularly the last attack, just focus a bit on it and on the scale of it, and then you go to the media. One of the main issues we address is what's the narrative that's relaying those facts in the media. Now, this by chance, when the Israeli attacks were happening, I was at the airport just reading the news on my iPhone, and what I saw was actually that two words were used. Killing was used on whomever was actually killed of the Israelis, and death was used for whomever was killed of the Palestinians. So here we start noticing the language difference between what's applied on an Israeli death and what's applied on a Palestinian death. This already starts forming a different narrative of what's happening to Israelis versus Palestinians. This is also to show the scale of difference in the media between what's happening factually and what's reported to us. So the right side is the children killed in 2004, Palestinian children killed in 2004. The black side is reported deaths, whereas the left side is Israeli children killed in 2004. This was New York Times, reporting 50% of Israeli children in 2004 and less than 10% of Palestinian children killed. So again, this is the narrative we receive through the media. This surely forms public opinion, and one of the most pronounced public opinions, obviously, is the United States. And in the most recent Gaza attacks in 2012, 57% of the US public was actually supporting Gaza attacks. Or should I say attacks on Gaza? So I'll just take a pause and use an example that I'm actually very obsessed with, which is a movie. I don't know if any of you has seen Memento. It's a movie that came out a couple of years ago where the character actually loses his short-term memory and is in search of the killer of his wife. But the only way for him to sort of memorize that is actually to engrave and tattoo some of the facts on his body, be it names of people he's tracking and so on. So all of this, his body becomes a tool to document very specific instances, and everything else is gone since he doesn't have his memory anymore, but anything that's on his body becomes part of that narrative that he's trying to resolve. In 2012, this came out in the New York Times, this image, fire, covered face, Arab world, someone throwing possibly a stone or something else. This was actually an image. If you don't read the title, you might think it's a terrorist attack or something like that. When this was actually was the day that a hunger striker decided to stop his hunger strike, a Palestinian detained in an Israeli prison. So it had nothing to do with fire or killing. It just had to do with a human being stopping his hunger strike. Why did this person go on a hunger strike? He was detained in an Israeli prison, not the first time he's detained. Detention means, administrative detention means that the person is taken into prison not knowing what they're taken into prison for. This is claimed secret knowledge. They don't undergo any court ruling, and they don't know how long they're staying there. Now, based on international law, that person is not meant to stay more than 6 months within that prison. What actually happens is that sometimes at the end of the 6 months, the person steps out of is allowed to step out of the prison, but then immediately before going to their family is taken back into a second and third and sometimes fourth round of administrative detention. And the trauma that this does mentally is absolutely something that maybe we can start imagining. So on day 52 of Khadr Adnan's hunger strike, social media started acting up. And obviously, luckily, social media actually nowadays influences mainstream media. So the first report of this hunger strike from December, when he started his strike, was actually in February. So imagine no one hearing about the cause, which is the detention, but actually starting to pick up on the hunger strike. So day 52, Al Jazeera publishes, and then Reuters picks up day 59. And then day 62, the New York Times, CNN, day 62. And then back to the image I started with, which is day 66, which is again about, I'm reminding that this is a hunger strike ending and nothing else, and the image has nothing to do with the cause. So what we do is actually take that story and turn it into a story that is not only about Palestinian, but is actually about the human being undergoing that social injustice. So in this case, we took a hunger strike and we went actually research of medical reports of what happens to a human being on a hunger strike and what's the maximum sort of amount of days for a being to strike, and who of the figures that today are seen as peacemakers have actually had to go through that as a tool to object. So our infographics get picked up by social media. We first put them either directly on our website and social media, or sometimes publish them hand in hand with mainstream media. And sometimes it gets picked up after the fact. Now, many of you, I'm sure, know the wall separating between what's called the West Bank and Israel. And it's sometimes named the security wall, sometimes named the separation wall, sometimes named the fence, whatever its name is. This is an image of it. And the story that goes on even to Palestinians who are living outside of Palestine, the story is that actually this is a wall separating very specifically a Palestinian area, geographic area from an Israeli geographic area. And this is a myth that everybody believes, even myself as part of the Visualizing Palestine team, and most of us in the team did not really realize that this wall, which in 2004 was internationally, by the International Court of Justice, named illegal in 2004, is actually, that's the yellow line, is actually separating within the West Bank between Palestinian and Palestinian. So it's not following the dotted line at the end, which is the edge of the West Bank. And actually superposed on that, what we did is we mapped out Israeli bus routes from Jerusalem into the settlements within the West Bank. So while the media actually calls it a security wall protecting Israelis from Palestinian terrorist attacks, what actually is a fact is that Israel builds a bus route network, a very sophisticated one, to bring Israelis into the West Bank. It's a bit puzzling, to say the least, and none of the media actually ever report or overlap these two facts. What you see, the lighter gray areas are actually the only areas accessible to Palestinians, whereas the darker areas have either checkpoints or are areas that Palestinians cannot step into or drive through. This is another version of the same map where we took the same facts, faded away sort of the West Bank and the wall, and saw it from the perspective of an Israeli from Jerusalem, where it's really a very typical bus route map, and where actually the West Bank is named Judea and Samaria, which is how often this area is called as opposed to the West Bank. Since we're at Ars Electronica, it's only nice to actually include how we do that. The information about the bus routes was not an available map. We had to go through different websites and collect those routes through scraping data and producing this first iteration of the map. So who's using all of that? The material that we produce, I'll go through a number of our infographics. This, for example, was produced by at least 4 people. One of them is an architect, graphic designer, researcher, and communications person. So this is about demolitions, collective demolitions since 1967 of Palestinian homes. And what we're finding is actually that by placing our infographics online, not only is the online community using them and spreading them, but also they're being downloaded by groups such as, in this case, a parliamentary group in the UK. This was produced in collaboration with End the Occupation, an organization based in Washington, D.C., that during the last APAC conference has asked us to produce visuals that basically campaign against the U.S. sending such a large budget to Israel for military aid. And those were, for the first time, published outside the social media realm in metro stations here in the Pentagon station. That's not it. It's one of the other ones. And during the APAC conference, there was this truck driving around the conference. One of the main things that we do is also to humanize and make the story relevant. So data is very dry and boring and often hard to remember. So one of the most marking points in our process is actually to do storytelling. So storytelling is also about making the information relevant to others, to people who, like myself, are not actually Palestinian. How do you make it of any relevance to them? In this case, we asked the expert working on in EWASH, one of the organizations we worked with. We told him, well, what's the main story that strikes you most from the data you collect and that you tell people? He told us, I actually always start my talk saying that Ramallah, a city in the West Bank, has more rainfall than London. Why is this relevant? Everybody knows how much rain there is in London, so it's very easy to capture. But also, most people think that the West Bank is a dry area. The average consumption or the average access to water by a Palestinian is 70 liters a day, which is under the WHO's minimum line of 100 liters a day, while settlers, Israeli settlers and Israelis have way above the 100 liters a day. And this also was used during World Water Day by EWASH, which is a collective of organizations including Oxfam, Save the Children, and others, and was distributed in print to a number of people, including Richard Falk, a special rapporteur for the occupied Palestinian territories. Here, I'll just run through a number of slides showing you who's been using them, including Fast Company, Jadaliya, Al Jazeera, English, the Daily Beast, the Huffington Post, Electronica, Intifada, Open Democracy, and other ones. The cycle, the process that we follow to produce these infographics starts with an idea. That idea either can be a theme coming up, a hot theme in the media, or an issue that's been persistent, like many issues. And then we take it into research. We work with internal researchers within the team, but also experts and a number of volunteers spreading globally. And then we take it into a stage that's the storytelling stage. We develop a brief. That brief is shared and communicated with the designers. The designers, along with the entire team of researchers and storytellers, produce the visual infographic, and then it gets released, and we measure the impact of that release. This takes you through some of the infographics. This hasn't been released yet. September is the month of olive harvest, and this was produced to show the impact of uprooting of olive trees in Palestine and how it's affecting the economy. It's equivalent to 33 Hyde Parks, and so Central Parks. So we try to make that link again. Five Broken Cameras is a movie that was nominated for the Oscar Award. So it's a documentary. It's the first Palestinian documentary to have been nominated for the Oscars. So we were asked to produce an infographic about specifically the area that the documentary was focused on. Also to say that we're not here to speak about Israel and Palestine. What we're focused on is social justice on the Palestinian individual and community. So one of the infographics that we're currently working on, this is not the infographic, this is the brief, collecting the data. We're still very far from producing the final product, but it's also talking here specifically about the Palestinian Authority, the way it works and its impact on the Palestinian individual. This will be coming up soon, so you'll be able to see it online. This is the most up-to-date, which will be released very soon. While the talks are going on since Oslo in '93 and continue to go on, and this is what the media is focused on, below all of that is actually a layer of what's factually happening. What's happening on the ground is that settlements in the West Bank, so Israeli homes built in the Palestinian area, which is the West Bank, including also there's Gaza, obviously, are on the increase. So while peace talks are claimed to happen, settlements are on the rise. Since '93, there's over 53,000 settlement homes that have been built. And in parallel, there's been 15,000 Palestinian homes that have been demolished by the Israeli government. Now, who's behind Visualizing Palestine? We're a team based in different locations. We're about on and off 10 to 15 people of different scales, be it researchers, designers, and other. The first person there, RAMZI'S Jabir, is the person who actually started the entire idea, and I'm showing this because one of the themes we're working on is IDs, Palestinian IDs. Not every Palestinian has the same type of identification, and some Palestinians can circulate in certain countries, some not. Some can actually go out of the West Bank, some not. Some can go from Gaza to the West Bank or not. And it's quite complicated. Someone marrying someone from Jerusalem and the West Bank cannot necessarily, can live under the same roof but not work in the same location, which makes it extremely difficult on couples. I'm going to put a very small audio from Ramzi on how he started the idea. Didn't work. Okay, anyway, too bad. So I'll just skip that. One very personal story of explaining how the impact, again, of having a green ID, which is a West Bank ID. You would, as a Palestinian living in the West Bank, you would have a Palestinian license plate as opposed to an Israeli yellow license plate. Now, this means that there are some routes, even in the West Bank, which is claimed Palestinian, that you cannot actually drive in. All of the red ones are roads. The gray area is the West Bank. The red roads are roads that have Israeli checkpoints. The white roads are roads that Palestinians are free to drive on without checkpoints, and the yellow ones, they are absolutely denied any access to, which means Ramzi and I worked on TEDx Ramallah, a TEDx event in Palestine, or on Palestinian territory, and the venue, Ramzi is from Ramallah, in the middle. The venue is in Bethlehem. So if you follow the track of routes from Ramallah to Bethlehem, you'll find that there's no direct route for him to drive within the half hour probably needed to get to Bethlehem. So it took him sometimes 2 hours to get there because he had to stop on checkpoints. So you can see the daily strain of living there. The reason I'm showing this is that it's not just about Palestinians. As a group of internationals, some of us are Arab, some of us are not. There's an American British with us, and different nationalities. To be able to work together, there are countries we cannot meet in. Palestine is not an option for us to meet in. Lebanese cannot fly into Palestine. The Palestinian with a green ID, Ramzi, cannot actually unless with exceptional permission, cannot be in Lebanon. So our meeting point was always Jordan. You can imagine the strain of 10 people meeting in a country and how much effort we have to put in on just financing our flights, but also noting that working online is not always an option. Lebanon has very weak internet connections, which put a lot of strain on the team as well. But this is Ramzi and Tamara working via Skype. We're not just a team of 10. We work with a network of people and always try to grow that network of designers, technologists, researchers, architects, and so on. Our work has been used by other groups and other individuals in at least 14 different countries and has been translated ourselves. We translate from English to Arabic and Hebrew, but 7 other countries or 7 other languages have actually connected with us to themselves translate the work and to provide the work in whatever other languages. The first ones were Koreans, and then Chinese and Portuguese, German, and other. This is to show where we've been, where the work has been used. We work on a number of different themes, and the whole idea of visualizing Palestine is not for it to stop at Palestine, but actually to provide a process that eventually can be transferred to other countries, including nowadays, if we start working on hopefully Syria, or we've been approached from Bangladesh to replicate the model. And so the intention is to zoom out of visualizing Palestine and to create something which is now we called and registered as visualizing impact, that then creates its projects on that basis. I'll end with a quote from Julia Basha, a documentary director, film director, and she summarized it really beautifully by saying that the work that Visualizing Palestine does increases the knowledge of the public on what's going on. That's one side of it and increases the action where it's needed. So thank you very much.